$4.4 million. That is the ransom colonial pipeline wired out in 2021 after attackers walked in through one unused account that had no multi-factor on it and shut fuel off to the eastern seaboard. But here is the part almost nobody puts on a slide. Before any ransom note, that intruder did one quiet thing first, and it is the single move that nearly every serious break-in depends on. Today you watch that exact move happen live in an isolated lab, and then you learn how a defender catches it every single time.
I'm Erica, and that quiet move has a name. It is called a shell. A shell is simply command line control of a remote computer. It is the foothold a crew establishes before they steal a single file, and it is the whole reason Objective 2.4 exists.
And this is exactly where the Security Plus exam lives, inside Objective 2.4, the malicious code and network attacks that follow an exploit. CompTIA loves to test whether you can recognize this one move from a single sentence of a scenario. Get it clean, and these turn into free points.
It helps to know where the shell sits in an attack. The phishing email, the stolen password, the exploit, those are just how the attacker gets through the door in the first place. The shell is what they do the instant they are inside. It is the difference between picking a lock and actually walking into the house and turning on the lights.
Hold on, let me push on that before anyone nods along. This is Fenrir. If the exploit already got them in, why does the shell even matter? Is it not just a footnote after the real break-in?
Because access without control is useless to them. An exploit that crashes a service is annoying. An exploit that hands the attacker a working command line is a catastrophe. The shell is the pivot point of the whole chain, and it sits right here. And every stage after that shell only happens because the shell came first. No foothold, no escalation, no command and control, no botnet. Kill the shell or kill its connection, and the rest of that chain never runs. That is the defender's whole opening, and we build on it all episode.
Fair enough. So the shell is the hinge the whole attack swings on, not a detail you skim past. I will give you that one.
Hi all, I'm Emma, and there are exactly 2 ways to open that shell, no more. Think of it as a phone call between 2 buildings. The entire attack hinges on one thing: which building dials first. Type 1 is a bind shell. The victim machine listens on a port, like leaving a front desk phone off the hook, and the attacker dials in. So the shorthand is precise: victim listens, attacker connects inbound. Type 2 is a reverse shell, and it flips that exactly. The victim is the one who dials out, calling the attacker's machine and handing over the keyboard the moment it connects. Victim calls out, attacker simply waits by the phone. That single reversal of who dials first is the most important fact in this entire episode.
And here is why a defender cares about that flip. Inbound firewalls do not stop an outbound call. Your firewall is a bouncer who only checks people coming in the front door, so an outbound call walking out the back gets waved right through, which means you defend by watching the call, not the wall. The defense cannot be the barrier itself, because the barrier already let the call out. The defense has to be noticing the call the moment your machine makes it.
And keep one thing straight, because the exam tries to trip you here. Malicious code is the broad family, the viruses, worms, and trojans that carry the payload onto the machine. The reverse shell and the command and control are what that code does once it lands. Erica, you have been sitting on the question our whole audience asks about this. Go ahead and put it to the room.
Yes, and it is the one beginners always ask. If the attacker is outside, how does the victim end up calling them? Doesn't the firewall block that? That puzzle is the whole reason this objective trips people up.
Perfect question to hang the whole episode on. So here is the plan. We open 2 terminals and pop a real shell in the lab. We answer Erica's firewall question head on. We call a threat hunter to show you how they catch it, and we finish on the one control that breaks all of it. Stay with us, because the moment that shell connects is the moment it all clicks. Theory is over, so let us make this concrete. Emma has 2 lab machines wired up on an isolated network where they can only see each other and nothing on the real internet. We show the attack briefly and on purpose so the concept truly sticks, and then we spend the rest of the episode learning to catch it. Emma, walk us through it.
Happy to, and the framing matters. 2 virtual machines, fully air-gapped, and this is a defensive demo so you learn what to look for, never to point at anyone. The attacker box is on one side of the screen, the victim on the other. We start on the attacker, and it is one boring command. The attacker starts a listener and then just waits. We tell Netcat to listen on port 4444 and hold the line open for anyone who calls. Watch, it does nothing dramatic. The cursor just sits there.
One quick decode of that command for the exam because those 4 letters come up. The -l means listen, -v is verbose, so it prints what it sees, -n skips slow name lookups, and -p sets the port. So the whole line means sit quietly on that port and tell me the moment someone connects.
Now the victim side, and this is the whole trick. In a real attack, this next line runs because someone opened a malicious attachment, or an exploit fired and dropped it in. The line tells Bash to open an interactive session and pipe it straight out to the attacker's address.
Pause on that one line because the exam loves it. There is no hacking tool being installed here at all. That /dev/tcp path is a feature built directly into Bash itself. The redirect symbols wire the shell's keyboard input and its screen output into a live network socket, so a plain login shell becomes a remote control session.
And now the payoff. The second that line runs on the victim, flip back to the attacker screen. The listener that was sitting empty just caught the call, and now the attacker is typing commands that run on the other machine. Look at what just happened. I typed Huami on the attacker machine, and it answered from the victim, victim-www. and hostname came back as prod-web-01. I am running commands on a server in another building through a connection the victim made to me. That is a popped shell.
That is genuinely unsettling to watch, and that is exactly the point of showing it. A slide can tell you a reverse shell exists and have you memorize a definition. Seeing the victim's own hostname answer back on the attacker screen is what makes you never forget it, on the exam or on the job.
And notice the strange part. The victim did all the work. It dialed, it connected, it handed over the keys. The attacker just left a phone off the hook and let the building call collect.
One detail to flag for the exam. The shell ran as the web server's own account, victim-www, not as the administrator. So the attacker is in, but with limited power for now. That gap is exactly what makes their next move so important, and it is also the first thing a defender should notice.
Right, and here's the fact to tattoo on your brain for the exam. When a scenario hands you that bash-i/dev/tcp one-liner, the answer is reverse shell every time. Not malware being installed, not a firewall rule, not encryption. A reverse shell using a built-in feature of the shell itself.
Which tells you precisely where to aim. You are not hunting a magic exploit. You are hunting a normal-looking server that suddenly decided to make an outbound call and then started poking around. Hold on to that because it is the thread the rest of this episode pulls, starting with the question Erica raised at the top. Before we keep going, one small favor that actually moves the needle. If this is landing for you, tap like, then subscribe and turn on the bell so you do not miss the rest. 2 taps completely free, and it pushes this in front of more people who need it.
Direction is everything here, and the reason comes down to how a firewall treats each direction. Firewalls are strict about traffic coming in and relaxed about traffic going out. Blocking every inbound connection is normal. Allowing outbound web traffic is also normal, because your employees need to browse and reach cloud services to do their jobs. So the attacker does not fight the firewall. They live in that everyday gap, and it is not a gap anyone forgot to close. It is the network working exactly as designed. That is why the puzzle feels impossible until you see it, and obvious the second you do.
Direction is the whole game, and it is the testable fact. Picture 2 doors with one guard who frisks everyone walking in and ignores everyone walking out. A bind shell tries to walk in the front and gets stopped cold. A reverse shell strolls out the back and the guard waves it through without a second look.
Let me put the two directions side by side because the exam questions answer themselves once you see it drawn. Start with the bind shell column, then the reverse shell column, step for step. Look at the bind shell column. Every box is red because each step runs straight into that inbound bouncer. The victim has to listen on a port, the attacker has to reach in from outside, and the firewall stops it at the door. Now the reverse shell column, and every box is green. It dials out, it rides a port the firewall already permits, and that inbound bouncer never even sees the connection start. Same idea, opposite direction, completely different outcome.
Which is precisely why a reverse shell is the default move against any firewalled target. It is not that bind shells never work. They only work on the rare machine you can reach directly, and almost nothing worth attacking sits out in the open like that. Fenrir, you have had a hand up on the obvious follow-up. Go ahead and ask it.
Yes, and it is the thing that confuses everyone. If the outbound connection rides a port the firewall already allows, then which port does the attacker actually use to slip past?
The smart ones use a port that is supposed to be open. 443, normal encrypted web traffic, is the favorite by a mile. Your firewall has to allow it for browsing and cloud apps to work at all, so a callback hiding inside it looks like one more ordinary web request among millions. The attacker merges into the busiest, most trusted lane on the whole network.
And for the exam, do not memorize any specific tool's flags because they will not ask you to recite them. They will ask which direction the connection travels, and the answer is still a reverse connection. The direction is the fact they test.
And that last green box matters enormously in the real world. Because the victim dials out, this works even when the victim sits behind a home router or corporate address translation with no public address at all. The attacker never needed to find the victim. The victim came to them.
Picture a regional hospital where one nurse opened a booby-trapped invoice on a workstation deep inside the network. That machine had no public address and sat behind layers of routers, so an attacker could never have reached it from outside. But it dialed out on port 443, and suddenly they were typing commands on a box they could never have found.
So every green box is really pointing at the same defensive move, and that is the sixth bullet on the board. You are not trying to keep attackers out of a perfect wall. You are trying to notice when your own machine makes a phone call it should never make. Stick with that because it is the single control that breaks everything we show today. But first, one shell is scary enough, so let us call someone whose whole job is finding thousands of them. A defender hunts the outbound call, not the payload, and that flips the whole thing over to the side that matters most for the exam and for your job. So rather than just tell you how a hunter thinks, we are going to bring one onto the line.
The community question underneath these videos is always the same. Once that shell has popped and it is hiding inside normal traffic, how does anyone actually find it? So we reached out to someone who knows beacon detection cold to answer exactly that.
So let me get him on the line now. We are asking one thing. When a reverse shell is buried inside ordinary web traffic, what is the very first thing a defender looks at? Give us a moment while it connects.
Glad to join, and the honest answer is that we do not read the traffic first. We start on the host itself, because the shell has to run somewhere.
So walk us through that first look. What do you actually type when you suspect a box has a shell on it?
The very first command is socket statistics. You list every open connection with the process that owns it, and you ask one blunt question. Should this program be talking to the internet at all?
So what jumps out at you in that one row?
A bash process on a web server holding a live connection out to an unknown address on 443. Bash has no business phoning the internet. That single row is the reverse shell caught red-handed, no matter how disguised the traffic is.
That is the part that surprised me. The encryption protects the contents, but it does nothing to hide that the wrong program is making the call.
Exactly right. Encryption hides what is said, never who is speaking. So the second thing I check is the family tree of that process.
The family tree meaning what spawned what?
Precisely. On a healthy web server, the web application is the parent and spawns predictable children. When that web app suddenly gives birth to a bash shell that opens a socket, that lineage is deeply abnormal, and it is the signature every good tool screams about.
So that behavioral piece, the web app giving birth to a shell, is what endpoint detection catches.
That is precisely it. It does not need to recognize the specific malware. It recognizes the pattern and kills it the moment the shell pops before the attacker types a second command.
Let me push on the optimistic version though. If detection is that good, do we even need to lock down the network? Can I not just watch every host?
I would love to say yes, but that is the trap that gets people breached. Detection is a safety net, not a wall, so prevent the easy call first, then assume some beacons still get out and build a team that hunts them down.
That is the perfect handoff, and you just previewed the exact argument we are about to have. Thank you for jumping on the line.
Happy to be here. If you remember one thing, remember to ask which program is making the call, because that question catches more shells than any fancy tool. Good luck on the exam.
Hold that thought, everyone, because one pop shell is scary, but now watch what happens when an attacker turns it into thousands of them. One pop shell is dangerous, but one shell on one machine is not what burns a whole company down. What scales it up is when that shell stops being a live phone call and becomes an obedient employee who checks in with the boss on a schedule. That is command and control, and it sits at the center of Objective 2.4.
A beacon. Instead of holding one connection open, the malware quietly reaches out to the attacker's server every so often. It asks, "Is there anything you want me to do?" runs whatever comes back, then goes quiet again. The industry catalogs it as its own tactic in the MITRE attack framework, labeled TA0011. When the SolarWinds backdoor hit in 2020, it lay dormant for up to 2 weeks, then beaconed out disguised as the software's own normal update traffic. When the exam says C2, that patient call home is what it means.
And the genius of a beacon is patience. A tool like Cobalt Strike is the commercial framework real crews lean on. It can be told to sleep for hours, even days, then wake at a random minute and check in for a single heartbeat. To your monitoring, it looks like one boring outbound request lost in millions. With no pattern, a tired analyst would flag. Now the number that makes a security chief sweat. One operator can hold thousands of these beacons at once. Thousands of obedient machines scattered across the world, all quietly checking in with one master, all waiting for one order. That collection, under a single hand, is a botnet, and the textbook example is Mirai.
In 2016, Mirai scanned the internet for cameras and routers still using factory default passwords, a list of just 62 username and password pairs. It grew to roughly 600,000 devices and pointed them all at one DNS provider. For an afternoon, half the internet's biggest sites went dark because a swarm of baby monitors aimed their traffic at the same target.
So here is the fork every defender faces, and it is worth arguing out loud because CompTIA tests both sides of it. Once beacons are loose, where does the money go? Emma believes you lock the door so nothing can call out. Erica believes you cannot stop what you refuse to watch. Emma, make your case first.
I want the call to never connect in the first place, so lock outbound traffic to a strict allow list. Your web server may reach the update mirror and the payment gateway and nothing else on the entire internet. When a beacon tries to phone home to some address that is not on the list, it screams into a wall and dies there. You cannot lose data you never let leave the building.
Hold there, Emma. Erica, every network I have ever seen has 1,000 outbound exceptions someone added on a Friday afternoon. Is that wall ever really solid?
It never is, and that is my whole point. You will never block every single outbound path in a real company, so you also have to watch behavior. A machine that phones the same odd address every 59 minutes, day and night, with no human driving it, is beaconing. That mechanical regularity is the confession, and only watching can catch it.
But watching means you are already breached and just hoping to notice in time.
And if your one prevention rule has a single gap, you are breached and blind, with no backup at all. So it is not either or. Prevention shrinks the surface, detection catches what slips through. The threat hunter told us the same thing: assume some beacons, get out and hunt them.
So here's the verdict, and it is grounded in the published record, not a coin flip. The guidance from MITRE's own mitigation list to the NIST Incident Handling Framework never tells you to pick one. The layered answer is the recommendation, the same one the standards land on. Prevention comes first to deny the easy call home, and detection sits right behind it because no wall is ever perfect. Defense in depth is not a buzzword here, it is the honest answer to a beacon engineered to hide. And on the exam, when a question pits detection against prevention as if you must choose, the layered both and answer is almost always the one CompTIA wants. Now let me put the shape of a botnet on the screen so you can see why one hand controls so many machines.
Before we name the fixes, look at why this scales, because the picture makes it obvious. A botnet is not one attacker touching thousands of machines by hand. It is a chain of command, and there is a classic diagram that shows exactly how one person controls an army. At the very top is the attacker machine, one person at one keyboard. Below that sits a layer of handlers, the middle managers that pass orders down, and below them, rows and rows of compromised machines, the actual bots, each one a popped device beaconing home. One hand at the top, thousands of hands at the bottom. Follow the arrows all the way down, and they converge on one thing at the bottom, the targeted servers. That is the swarm of baby monitors from the Mirai story, all pointed at a single victim. And notice, every single one of those bots is defined by the same thing, an outbound connection reaching up the chain. Cut those connections and the whole pyramid collapses.
Which is why there is one control that hits every layer of that picture at once. It is called egress filtering. And do not let the jargon scare you. Ingress is traffic coming in, egress is traffic going out. For decades we obsessed over ingress while waving egress straight through. Egress filtering simply says, let us finally inspect the traffic leaving the building too.
So you flip the firewall's lazy side and start inspecting what leaves. Instead of letting every machine talk to the whole internet, you write an allow list where your web server may reach the update mirror and the payment gateway and nothing else on Earth. The reverse shell dials out toward the attacker, hits a wall it was never told about, and dies before it ever connects. The exact same rule that stops today's shell stops tomorrow's beacon.
And to be fair to that approach, egress filtering is not free, and a co-host arguing it is would be selling you something. It takes real, ongoing work to know which destinations every server legitimately needs. A too strict rule can quietly break a software update, a license check, or a customer payment at the worst possible moment. That is the honest trade-off. The control that stops the attack is the same one that can take down production if you rush it without mapping your traffic first.
Which is the mature way to hold it. The answer is not skip egress filtering because it is hard. The answer is do it carefully, document what each system talks to, and watch the logs while you tighten. Worth it, but earn it.
Now the endpoint piece, the one that catches the very attack we opened with. Endpoint detection, or EDR, sits on the machine and watches behavior rather than just files. When a web server suddenly spawns a bash shell that turns around and opens a network socket, that sequence is deeply abnormal, and the tool is built to scream about exactly that pattern. It catches the reverse shell at the moment it pops.
And the timing gives a beacon away even when you cannot read it. Modern C2 hides inside encryption, so your firewall sees an encrypted blob going somewhere and cannot read what is inside. But a human browses in bursts and then stops, while a beacon checks in like a metronome, the same gap every time, even at 3 in the morning when nobody is at the keyboard. That perfect rhythm no person would ever produce is the giveaway.
And your logs hold the story after the fact, even when nothing caught it live. A beacon has to resolve a domain name and route through a proxy to phone home, so your DNS logs and your proxy logs quietly keep the fingerprints the whole time. The same odd address, over and over, at a strange mechanical rhythm. That repetition sitting in plain text is the tell a hunter goes looking for. And let me show you, in plain code, exactly what egress filtering is killing. A beacon is not magic. At its core, it is a tiny loop, and once you see it stripped down, the fix names itself. That is the whole idea. Ask for a job, run it, then sleep, and repeat forever. Now look at the line that fetches the next instruction. The entire loop depends on that single outbound request reaching the C2 server. Egress filtering cuts that one line, and the whole sophisticated beacon just spins in place forever, asking a question that never gets an answer.
And that is the beauty of attacking the outbound call instead of the payload. There are countless ways to write that beacon in Python, in PowerShell, or in something nobody has even seen yet. But every single one must reach out to a server to get its orders. Block the reaching out, and you do not have to recognize the specific malware at all, which is what makes egress filtering so powerful against attacks that have not been invented. This is also why the next domain of the course exists. When you study security operations, the log correlation system we call a SIM, and the endpoint detection we keep mentioning, this attack is the reason every one of those tools is on the exam. And the industry keeps a public, constantly updated map of exactly the tricks we are describing. That is the live MITRE attack page for Command and Control Tactic TA0011. Defenders use it to know exactly which call home tricks to hunt for. It is the difference between guessing and working from the same playbook the attackers do.
And do not forget the layers under all of it. Segmentation keeps that first popped web server from reaching your database at all, and least privilege means the shell that pops runs as a nobody account that cannot climb. Those two shrink the blast radius before egress even comes up. And remember where the botnet got its army in the first place. Mirai did not burn a Genius 0 day. It simply logged in with admin and password, because nobody changed the credential the device shipped with. Changing default credentials is the cheapest, most boring control on the whole exam, and it is the one that starves a botnet at the source before a single beacon ever calls home.
So put it together as one honest picture. You cannot keep every attacker out forever, but you can make sure that the moment one gets a foothold, the door it tries to open leads nowhere, and the call it tries to make trips every alarm you own. If you forget everything else, carry this home. Defense is not a perfect wall. It is making sure the outbound call never completes and never goes unnoticed. So here is what to carry out of today. A reverse shell wins because the victim dials out and the firewall only watches the door coming in. A beacon turns that one shell into patient, scheduled control, and a swarm of beacons is a botnet. Every layer of that depends on one outbound call.
And here is the defender's whole playbook in one breath. Break the call with egress filtering, catch the odd process with endpoint detection, and read the mechanical rhythm in your DNS and proxy logs. You are always hunting the outbound connection, never chasing the specific payload.
Here is your move tonight, no lab required. Check any device you own with a login, your home router, a camera, a smart plug. Confirm it is not still sitting on the password it shipped with from the factory. That one boring 5-minute habit is the exact thing that would have starved the Mirai botnet of every device it ever recruited.
Next time we pull the camera all the way back from a single attack, we map every vulnerability type CompTIA tests, and the one that quietly causes the most real-world breaches is not a Genius 0 day at all. Wait until you see how often the door was just left unlocked, the patch never applied, the bucket left wide open.
If watching that shell pop made Objective 2.4 finally click, hit like and subscribe, because we are building the whole Security Plus series this way, showing you the attack and then the defense instead of just describing them. And the free practice quizzes at certs.professorerica.com let you drill it until it sticks. And here is the one only you can answer. When you watch the victim's hostname answer back on the attacker's screen, what was the first defense that popped into your head? Tell us in the comments. Every good teacher was once a confused student. Keep going.
I will say this for Cynthia. No drift, no filler, no apologies. 9 out of 10. This is Professor Erica. Thanks for watching and signing off.